Hello there, dear friends, and welcome once again to the Relaxed Fantasy Review. Today, we're wrapping up our series on the subclasses of Drakkenheim. From Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim, we've talked about all sorts of classes and subclasses, and today we're talking about the Wizard. In the world of Drakkenheim, all spellcasters that would be considered arcane, wizards, sorcerers, warlocks, etc., all have to be part of the Amethyst Academy. The Amethyst Academy is a lawful organization which regulates and trains the users of magic in the world, but also keeps them safe from those who would fear them. The idea is that, many generations ago, there was a rising of sorcerer kings that ruled the world with an evil grasp, and they were taken down, and some people wanted to exterminate spellcasters so it would never happen again. The Amethyst Academy was formed as a middle ground. But not everybody who wants to be a caster can go this way, and the subclass we're talking about today is called the Malfeasant, a wizard that doesn't want to be part of the Amethyst Academy. They are an independent spellcaster, which usually means that they are on the wrong side of the law. But what does this subclass mean for your mechanical abilities? We'll get into the details in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to let you know, Relaxed Fantasy Review has memberships. For just $1 a month, you can support me here on YouTube and get a couple benefits. First, you get a little badge next to your name in the comments, letting folks know that you're a supporter, but also you get early access to my videos. I upload videos 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I upload them a day early for members only. So if that interests you, you can click the join button just below the video. I'd love to see you in the comments. And if it doesn't interest you, that's totally fine. I'm thankful that you're here anyway, watching my content and supporting me here on YouTube. So wizards choose their subclass at level 2. And if you choose the Malfeasant as a subclass, you get a couple very specific benefits. First, Forbidden Study. Every time a wizard levels up, they get to add 2 spells to their spellbook just based on their own personal research. But a Malfeasant wizard gets an extra spell, a 3rd one, that specifically has to come from the Contaminated spell list. In Drakkenheim, there are some spells that when you cast them, you gain a level of Eldritch Contamination. This is similar to Exhaustion in the sense that it will build up inside of you, and it will disable you in certain ways. But if you get too many of them, then you basically die. You transform into a hideous monster and lose control of your character. Contaminated spells kind of work in this vein, where they are much more powerful versions of their spells. But you have to take a level of contamination to cast them. And usually these spells are hidden spells that you have to discover or be taught by other Malfeasants or by other wizards. But this one just gets them, because they aren't bound by the rules of the Academy. These spells are incredibly strong, and I think that just getting an extra spell added to your spellbook while still getting your normal 2, that's 10 out of 10. Your spellbook being full of spells is what you want as a wizard, and this just stacks them up. Another thing you get here is, it's called Horrific Potention. Horrific Potention? Yeah, alright. Horrific Potention. If you have a monstrous transformation happen to you, then you have a specific CR rating that monster can be. The book specifies that usually the transformation is decided by the DM, and it's supposed to be relative to your character's strength. In this case, I don't really know why this feature's here. It says that you can't have a CR higher than your level, but you also can't have one that's less than half of your level. So, cool? I don't really know what this is for. Like, I'm not... Dungeon Dudes, could you shed a bit of light on this one? Why this feature is here? Because I'm honestly not sure. I can't even, fathom why, because the DM is supposed to be able to pick your monstrous transformation as appropriate. This just feels like it's shackling the DM. which never feels like a good thing. I mean, if you don't monstrous transformation means your character is dead. So this is not really relevant. I'd say 5 out of 10 because it doesn't hurt you, but it doesn't do anything for you. So, This one's a wash. The other one you get at level 2 is anomalous materials, and this is important. Anomalous materials states that when you cast a contaminated spell, you can choose not to get contaminated. Contaminated spells need a special material. It's called delirium, which is the source of eldritch contamination. It is crystals of raw magical power that are dangerous. You need these to cast contaminated spells, and it usually consumes them. When you use anomalous materials, it doesn't consume the delirium. You just have to have it. You can't do this infinitely. You can only do this proficiency bonus times per day. So at level 2, that's twice. Twice per day you can cast a contaminated spell safely. But that is huge. Contaminated spells are so much more powerful than their non-contaminated counterparts. They're designed that way. They're meant to be risk-reward, and the Malfeasant Wizard doesn't have to worry about that a lot. So I give this feature 10 out of 10 again. Even at level 2, having contaminated spells will make you significantly stronger than most other spellcasters. Now, at level 6, you get a power called Increased Threshold. This one is a bit complicated. Firstly, you get resistance to necrotic damage and Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is massive. Those two things on their own could have been the feature. But we have to talk about Eldritch Contamination to truly understand Increased Threshold. Like Exhaustion, I mentioned this earlier, when you gain a level of contamination, it has a negative effect on you. The first one does nothing. The second one can reduce your speed or your health or your abilities. There are negative benefits that stack as you gain levels. Normally, when you get 6 levels of contamination, you transform into a monster. Increased Threshold doubles that. You can now have 12 levels of contamination before you transform into a monster. And the effects you have because of contamination are determined as half what you actually have rounded down. Meaning that because the first level of contamination doesn't negatively affect you, you can have up to 3 now, and it won't negatively affect you. You have to have a 4th before you actually have some sort of bad effect. And considering the fact that you can cast contaminated spells a few times per day without it actually contaminating you, you have so much room to work with now. There is one downside, and it requires understanding how Purge Contamination works. Purge Contamination is a spell that you can cast which removes contamination from a creature. It doesn't go away if you long rest, it stays. When you cast it, you swap levels of contamination for levels of exhaustion. Why this is important is that if you gain 6 levels of contamination, you won't monstrously transform, but if you use Purge Contamination, it'll give you 6 levels of exhaustion, which will just outright kill you on the spot. And this feature is very clear that this is how this works. What this means is that if you have more than 6 levels of Eldritch Contamination, you should not use Purge Contamination on yourself. Still, having this extended threshold for contamination, plus the proficiency in saving throws, in con saves, and in resistance to damage, this is still a 10 out of 10 feature. It's incredibly useful, and it stacks really well with your ability to cast contaminated spells more safely. So that's a 10 out of 10. But you also get something at level 6 called Expel Contaminants, where when you long rest, you can reduce your contamination by half of your proficiency bonus. So if you have 6 levels of contamination, and you can't use Purge Contamination to take it away, because that would kill you, now you just have to long rest, and because your proficiency bonus is 2, you can remove one of those levels yourself, and now you only have 5. And now you can use Purge Contamination, you'll have 5 levels of exhaustion, but you also could just not use Purge Contamination. If you long rest and you can remove a couple levels of contamination every single time, why use Purge Contamination? It means you're going to be balancing how contaminated you are versus how desperately you need to cast contaminated spells, but the option is still nice. And I say that this is a 9 out of 10 power that really pushes the limits on contaminated spellcasting. Speaking of contaminated spellcasting, at level 10, you get a power called Contaminated Casting. This allows you to upcast spells by gaining levels of contamination. Basically, if you cast a spell that is of a specific spell level, you can, instead of upcasting it with a higher slot, just take levels of contamination instead and upcast it for free. The example the book gives is Fireball is a 3rd level spell, and you could use a 5th level spell to upcast it because you're level 10, or you could just take 2 levels of contamination and cast it at 5th level. You can't do this above the spell slots you have, so you can't upcast to 9th level with a 5th level spell slot if you don't have a 9th level spell slot. But the fact that if you burn your higher level spell slots, you can still upcast into it is a decent power, and I think that it could be worth the risk. The one downside to this, other than the fact that you're gaining contamination, is the fact that you can't upcast contaminated spells this way. Which is a shame, because I feel like that wouldn't have been too broken, because you can't use your anomalous materials along with contaminated casting to negate, because you're negating the initial contamination level, not the added contamination level. Still, it's a 9 out of 10 power to be able to emergency upcast if necessary, and I could definitely see this being helpful in a lot of situations. Plus, by now, your proficiency bonus is high enough that you can remove 2 levels of contamination per long rest, so you're less worried about it. The other thing you get when you're at level 10 is Stabilizing Focus. Stabilizing Focus says that while you are concentrating on a spell, which could be all the time in theory, or at least during combat and during specific times. There's a lot of spells that have hour-long time, so you could cast a summoning spell or something of 2nd or 3rd level and just have a concentration going all the time. But when you do this, the effects of contamination no longer affect you. So if you have 2 levels of contamination, nothing affects you anyway because of your increased threshold. But if you have 4, 6, 8, or 10, and you would normally suffer an effect, now when you concentrate, you don't. So maintaining concentration becomes essential for you when you're at high levels of contamination. The only exception is a monstrous transformation. If you reach 12 levels of contamination, you transform, you lose control of your character, and you're done. But still, being able to suppress contamination when you concentrate, super good. I say 9 out of 10 once again. The final ability you get at level 14, this is the one that really turns contamination on its head. As if we haven't already ignored it, suppressed it, used it to upcast. We've done a lot with Eldritch Contamination, but Apotheosis in Flesh, the level 14 feature, takes it to an entirely another level. When you monstrously transform, so you hit 12 levels of contamination, you retain control of yourself for 1 minute. This is similar to polymorphing into a massive aberration monster. This is where the horrific potention, that feature that I didn't know why it was called that. That feature that says you have a specific window of transformation, this is when it becomes useful, because you can't transform into a weaker creature. You can only transform into one that's half your level in CR or higher up to your level. So anywhere between level 7 and 14 CR, which is a pretty strong monster. You have control of this monster now, because it's you, for 1 minute. So you effectively, if you get all this contamination, you polymorph into a giant monster, and now you can tear things up. Once the minute's done, you lose control of yourself. But we're still not done. After 24 hours in this monstrous form, assuming you don't die, because if you're killed while you're in this form, that's different, but you can still run away from your allies so they can get away from you. Then you spend 24 hours transformed, and then you gain the benefits of a long rest, and all of your contamination disappears. So monstrous transformation isn't a death sentence anymore. The only downside is that when this happens, obviously you'll probably be alone, because your allies will probably have run away from you and left you alone. But you did get the benefits of a long rest, which is nice. And you will inherit a form of Drakkenheim madness, which is just an indefinite form of madness. Like, you know, lifelong, you'll go a little crazy. And the DM can decide how much you remember from your time when you were a monster. This is an amazing buff for two reasons. One, it takes something that was a death state for any other character and turns it into a non-death state for you. And you could even trigger it on purpose if you intentionally upcast something and just go crazy with your contamination. Now you can monstrously transform whenever you want to. I don't recommend it, but it's a nice break glass in case of emergency power. You combine that with the fact that now contamination basically can't kill you. I say this is 10 out of 10. In Drakkenheim, this is an invaluable power, and it takes a wizard from being, you know, resistant and have a stretched threshold of contamination to basically not caring. I mean, you still have to care, but it's good. This is a 10 out of 10 power. The Malfeasant wizard takes a brand new feature of Drakkenheim, contamination, and turns it into a tool that you can use. Now, I'm giving the subclass 9 out of 10 for two reasons. One, outside of Drakkenheim, most of this means nothing. Contamination levels don't exist in normal D&D games. Obviously, you could import them, but if you don't have Delirium and Eldritch Contamination in the contaminated spell list, then this subclass basically does nothing. Like, it has no benefits anymore. So that's one reason it's not a 10 out of 10. The other reason is that it might lend itself to a reckless playstyle. And while that's fine, it very much has a wild magic feel to it, where yes, you get a lot of powerful abilities, and yes, you can utilize this dangerous thing for yourself, but it very much is a solo, I'm doing this for me mindset, because if you monstrously transform because you weren't careful, or you have too much contamination on you, it could be detrimental to your party. Of course, we're talking about the subclass itself. We're not talking about its party dynamics. So I'm still giving it 9 out of 10. It's powerful, and it utilizes contamination in a way that no other class in Drakkenheim can. This is very easily the most efficient way that you can play with delirium and contamination in this book. And that merits it 9 out of 10 from me. This has been the Relaxed Fantasy Review. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe down below. Have a look for the join button down there, as well as a link to Ghostfire Gaming. That's where you can buy Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim, which was written by the Dungeon Dudes, my fellow YouTubers. I highly suggest you go and check out the book and check out their channel for yourself. Have a good one, my friends.